Welcome to another episode of Exercise Matters with me, Randall Cooper.
And me, Mick Hughes.
Support for today's episode comes from Premax Performance Skincare. If you're active, you focus on strength, endurance, and recovery. But what about your skin? Sweat, friction, and the elements take a toll. That's where Premax comes in. High-performance skincare made for high-performance people. From recovery creams to anti-chafe balms, massage creams to exercise-specific barrier creams, we help your skin go the distance. Keep your skin as fit as your body with Premax. Available now at premax.co.
And support for today's episode also comes from Learn.Physio. Health professionals, are you staying ahead of the game? Learn.Physio brings you cutting-edge education from world-class experts in sports and musculoskeletal medicine. Online courses, hands-on practicals, and expert resources backed by the latest evidence and designed to fit into your busy schedule. To be your best, learn from the best. Get started today at Learn.Physio.
Well, Mick, we're up to episode 6 of Exercise Matters, and it's this one I'm looking forward to. This is, for those of you listening, basically the way Mick and I do it is that we alternate who leads the episode, and this is Mick's lead, and we're going to talk about caffeine. And it's been a special interest of mine, I think, since I've been about 17 or 18 years old, mate, because I love coffee. And all this good news that we're about to talk about on how it can help athletic performance as well is this music to my ears. But I think we divulged in a previous episode that we both love our coffee, don't we?
We do love our coffee. What's your favourite way to have it, mate?
I start strong and then I back off as the morning goes on. So
Start off strong and come home weak.
That's it. That's the story of my life, really. That a double espresso black.
Yep.
Is the way I get going. And
Yep.
I do have it first thing. So I don't know if we're going to get into it this morning about the timing of when you kind of have your caffeine, but I know Andrew Huberman, for those who listen to Huberman Lab, kind of says you should wait an hour or two before you kind of have your coffee to let all those, sleepy.
Boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sleepy hormones kind of do their thing, but I just get straight into it. And then as the morning goes on, I tend to kind of put a little bit of milk or cream in my coffee as well. What about you?
Being a recent, right in the thick of having young kids, and certainly in more recent years with really young kids and some disrupted sleeps, I'm like you, mate. I go hard early and probably will have somewhere between, it has slowed down, I must admit, but I used to be easily and routinely having 3 to 5 long blacks before lunchtime, with the first one being pretty much in somewhere between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., depending on when the kids got up that morning. And then I'd definitely taper off and slow down. I would very rarely have anything beyond 12 o'clock. And it would have had to have been a really rough night if I'm having coffee at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But yeah, I'm largely a long black man. On the weekends, I go a bit bougie. On the weekend, I found myself having a Nutella latte, which was absolutely delicious. So, yeah.
I'll tell you,
go wild on the weekends, but keep it sensible through the midweek.
And I can see for those who are watching, Mick's got his coffee going now. I'll tell you just a really quick, funny story about the intersection between coffee and sport. Is that when I worked for Hawthorn Football Club, the president of the club at that stage was Jeff Kennett. Jeff Kennett was a former premier of Victoria, and known, for a better word, grumpy guy. And we had a game, and we're playing interstate, and I got to sit next to Jeff on the bus, and I was asking him if he wanted a coffee, and he said, no, I gave that up actually when I was premier. And I said, oh, why? And he goes, well, I actually had a 15 a day coffee habit. And I said, wow, it must have taken you a while to get off that. And he said, no, I went cold turkey. One day I realized that it wasn't right for me whilst I was premier, and I went cold turkey, and it's like, oh, no wonder everyone didn't like you. Yeah.
Made him a little bit more agitated, gave him a few more headaches. Oh,
That's
my
it.
gosh.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I'll never forget I was absolutely, I just loved sport. I loved the Olympics. I was just fascinated by it all growing up. And I remember this one story just really kind of stands out in memory. I think it was the 1988 Seoul Olympics. I remember hearing the story that we had an Australian athlete fail a caffeine blood test or a drug test. Alex Watson, he was a fencer.
I remember it.
He was a Yeah, and the story went that he had like 32 cups of coffee and a couple of cans of Coke and some chocolate bars leading up to his event. Yeah, like WADA and USADA have now not banned caffeine from 2004, but caffeine was certainly considered a banned substance for a long time in very, very high doses. And I can't imagine 32 cups of coffee in one sitting, just how jittery that was. But yeah, I think he got banned for a while too after that.
He did.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
yeah,
he
that
was he
story
was a
just
fencer from
still
memory.
sticks out. Yeah, he was a fencer. Yeah. But yeah, mate, we digress, but we'll jump back. We'll to
Let's
the
talk
show.
about the science. Yeah.
Caffeine, it's been widely studied in many different domains. It's a huge topic, obviously. We're going to really sort of narrow down our focus today on the known and established evidence to support its use in endurance training, anaerobic training, and resistance training. And I found a couple of interesting bits and bobs about its effect on delayed onset muscle soreness. And then we'll round it out with a bit of dosage timing and some safety there. But it's I guess the nitty gritty of it, caffeine itself it's a naturally occurring stimulant that comes in many different forms. Obviously, coffee beans is probably the most widely known way to get your caffeine, but certainly teas have got caffeine, cacao beans, soda drinks, energy drinks, and often you can get it in powder and tablet form as well. The way it acts on the body is that it involves blocking the adenosine receptor or the adenosine receptors, which counteracts drowsiness, enhances wakefulness. By doing so, it's it also increases respiratory drive and improves the diaphragm's contractility. So you can sort of imagine with that effect on the body from a performance point of view, it's definitely got some legs there to help us in physical activity and sport.
I think that's the key, isn't it? That so many people understand and use caffeine on a day-to-day basis for mental alertness. And I know that we're going to dig into the athletic performance in this episode, but it works. We know that. We won't go through the studies today. We'll leave that to others. But less so, people understand that it's terrific for sport. And it almost doesn't matter what sport you do. I don't want to kind of give your story away, Mick, but it's just whether you're doing strength training or aerobic, whatever, there seems to be just benefits across the board if you get your dosage right and you take it at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. I must admit, before taking a deep dive into this literature, I probably didn't appreciate its profound effect on resistance training, anaerobic training, and certainly its effect on perceived muscle soreness as well. I think the literature has been around and it's very widely publicised that it's got a positive effect on, aerobic performance and endurance, but to have some really well-known benefits and accepted benefits in the anaerobic and resistance training domains, it's pretty cool. So it's got some wide-reaching benefit. Let's kick off with the endurance and what is certainly well known and established. And the papers that I'll discuss today, most of them are systematic reviews. So for those who are not sciencey or in the health domain, systematic reviews are undertaken by a researcher or a research group, and they basically collect a whole lot of randomized trials, more often than not, where an intervention group is compared against another intervention group, and then, if possible, if it can be compared to against a control group, to really give it some strong legs. And so these systematic reviews are a collection of the best available evidence there. So rather than sort of cherry pick information from one study and apply it in this conversation, I purposely have chosen these systematic reviews that have really sort of gathered all the information. So this one here in particular had 21 randomized control trials looking at the effect of caffeine on endurance running performance, specifically looking at time to exhaustion and time trial runs. So what they found was that the caffeine showed a medium-sized and significant ergogenic effect, prolonging the timed runners' runs compared to a placebo, meaning that they extended their run time by as much as 17% when caffeine was ingested. Now, the authors did say that of all the studies on average, the caffeine dosage typically range from 3 milligrams to 9 milligrams. But as
per kilogram.
A kilogram, should make that clear. Which, when we break it down, if we've got an 80 kilogram male, we're looking at least 240 milligrams of caffeine, which is effectively a standard cup of coffee, give or take a few milligrams, up to potentially 9, which is we're up into the 720, which is a hell of a lot of coffee. Yeah, it's probably three or four coffees before you go off and do a run, which is a fair bit. So that was it was really clear, 17% improvement in your time to exhaustion runs. The time trial probably had less of an effect. So the ability to run further in a set time was marginally better, still significantly better, but very small in the whole scheme of things. And it reduced the time by less than 1%, so about 0.7%. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but if we're setting the time and we're covering more distance, obviously that makes some benefit.
Was there, in this systematic review, did they also talk about perception of effort also? I think that one of the things I've read, and I don't know if this is kind of, you found this either with your research, Mick, was that also when you do ingest that caffeine, you can run just as fast, but if you're putting it on a PPE scale, for instance, and you used to do a 10 and you take the caffeine, you'd rate it a 7 or an 8. It just feels easier. I don't know if you found that in this research or even found it yourself.
Not particularly in the research that I looked at in this study, but it's certainly talked about in later studies, which we'll talk about. Anecdotally for me, yeah, I get that. And I feel that all the time. Like every morning when I go to the gym, I sit down and I have a long black. I've sort of given myself 20 minutes to, wake up, have my cup of coffee, do my thing, and then. But I notice that difference when I'm not able to do that in the morning. If I'm just rushing out the door and I miss my cup of coffee, I'm N equals 1. I'm only one person, and there's going to be so much day-to-day variability. But even if it is a placebo, I do feel so much more switched on and ready to go and ready to lift when I do have that cup of coffee in the morning.
Yeah, no, me too. I mean, I drink coffee so regularly that it's almost like that morning is my default state now. And if I don't have it, it's you kind of know the other way around. What's probably is just normal.
Yep. Now, despite these really good results, I think there's really important couple of things to flag here, and the limitations of this one particular systematic review. And it's actually quite a common theme that we're seeing in a lot of the evidence we talk about today. But there's a strong sex bias and gender bias in this literature, and males are certainly overrepresented in these studies, and females underrepresented. So females only accounted for about 7% of the population group in this systematic review. So that's not much at all. So we've got to be, I guess, really careful in generalising this information to our untrained or our trained or our recreational or elite female endurance runners. We don't have a great body of evidence there, which once again makes researchers need to sort of shift their attention and study females a bit more than just taking the males. So that's certainly an important consideration there when discussing with your athletes and your patients. Also, too, the way that the caffeine, so to speak, was ingested. Some of these studies, they ingest it via coffee. Sometimes they ingest it via gels, powders, caffeine tablets, so on and so forth. So just some consideration there when we're talking about that. And then lastly, sometimes, and some of the studies do have caffeine co-ingested with another source. So sometimes it's not purely just caffeine that's taken on board.
So that could be like energy drinks that have got all the other kind of ergogenic aids, stimulants that can be in there as well. Is that really what that means?
Yeah, that's what that means. Yep.
Yeah. I think they're really important points because, I think that I've been paying attention to obviously like exercise related research recently. Well, probably for the last 30 years, but recently, particularly with women. And I think that, there used to be a generalization that we're all the same when it comes to athletic performance in a lot of these studies, but there's been a rise of kind of like, hang on, maybe possibly, things are a little bit different for females.
Yeah.
And the research that's being done in different areas is starting to show that that's true. So I think that, if only 7.5% of these participants have been male, then extrapolating that out and having that as only female to apply to all females as well, I think further research needs to be done.
Yeah, and that's why if you haven't listened to Dr. Stacey Sims on this topic, she's an she's everywhere. Absolute
for a good
wealth of
reason.
Information.
Yeah.
She is 100%. And I remember listening to her at a conference I was talking at once. Her main message here is women are not small men. And she really highlights and shines the disparity between males and females, in particular the disparity between females and how they're so underrepresented in exercise science papers and strength and conditioning papers especially. And often the male data is just basically shoved on to female athlete who've got completely different energy needs, hormonal differences, training strategies, the way they respond to different things is completely different to men. So just, if you haven't listened to any of Stacey's work or podcasts, I strongly urge you guys to jump on and try and find her. She's an absolute gun when it comes to this stuff.
Agreed.
Moving on to caffeine on anaerobic performance. So anaerobic it was a really interesting find for me because, as I said before earlier, was well-known literature and established evidence in the endurance space. But the effect of caffeine it has on anaerobic performance. Now, this systematic review meta-analysis looked at 24 randomized control trials in both highly trained and elite athletes in team sports, racket sports, and combat sports. So we're not just looking at high intensity sprint training or, the 200-meter event or a 400, 800-meter track and field event. We're actually looking at a whole lot of different things here. And the key findings of this review was that caffeine significantly increased the frequency of various high-intensity actions such as sprints, body impacts, accelerations, decelerations, and the number of high-intensity offensive actions involved in sport. It also had improved success rate when breaking down skills. So, for example, successful serves in tennis, receptions in volleyball, rebounds, assists in basketball, successful even.
You had your coffee, Mick?
It hasn't quite kicked in yet. Maybe I've had too many and I'm a bit sort of jittery with my words. Successful free throw attempts in basketball or netball.
Yep.
So really, really cool findings there that, those key performance indicators in sport are seen. So that's cool. And once again, females underrepresented in this review. This time, 34% of the sample were females compared to the 66% being males.
Isn't that interesting research that, like the way I read that is that we know that, it helps with anaerobic performance, but I also, some of those things also look like they're decision-making kind of components of sport as well. And as we spoke about earlier, the mental alertness that can come from caffeine, I just wonder whether this is a beautiful intersection between the mental and the physical in sport. And if you are in team sports or sports that require this quick decision-making, such as tennis, such as racket sports, then the caffeine has that dual effect on both your brain and your nervous system, but then also kind of like your musculoskeletal system also.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like it's, I agree. That's the two-pronged attack, essentially. You've got that heightened cognitive, but also the heightened physiological. It's always fascinating sort of hearing this because last topic we talked about was sleep. And, I remember hearing stories about rugby league players that are involved in, grand final matches, and you would have seen the same in AFL matches, state of origin in particular. So state of origin here is kind of in rugby league circles, it's kind of like the Super Bowl, so to speak, of the NFL or the NBA championship. It's always played on a Wednesday night at 8 p.m. at night. And these players are absolute, like they hate each other. The two states hate each other. They kind of thrash and bash. And you hear these stories about how they kind of amp themselves up. They have a lot of players are known to sort of take caffeine tablets and stimulants. So they thrash themselves around for, 80, 90 minutes. And you hear these stories that once the game's done, some of these players won't sleep because not only have they sort of, been on this high of playing football, but they've also been on this sort of synthetic high of, having high doses of caffeine at such a late time of the day. And so, they often won't get to sleep till about 5 o'clock the next morning, if at all. So I guess that's the downside to it.
Yeah, we had that issue a lot when at Hawthorn when I was there, and I know that it's still an issue for plenty of AFL players because they will take caffeine before they play. The game starts at 7:30 or 7:40, goes for 3 hours, so they don't finish until 10:30, and then they've got the dual effect of being totally caffeinated still, but also then the just the excitement from the game and whatever. I listened to a podcast with Paddy Cripps just the other day, the captain of Carlton here in Australia, and he said that he used to try and fight it, and early in his career he'd go home and try his best to go to sleep, and he says now I just embrace it. And what I'll do is I go after the game, I go back to the club and he gets in the warm and cold pools and he just sits around and he talks to other players about the game. And he just says, I just slowly wind down and I don't leave the club till usually 3 o'clock in the morning or so, just understanding that I can't,
Yeah,
it's
you
just
can't
part of
fight it.
it. Just, you can't fight it and it's just part of the sport now.
Yeah, fascinating. You had a rough, just completely off topic, but your Sydney Swans unfortunately had a bit of a rough loss to my Collingwood on the weekend. So I just thought I'd just
yeah, don't rub it in.
just
There was a worse one, the grand final last year as well. So it's funny how quickly you can slide. They'll come back. Come on, the
anyway. I
Swans.
thought talking AFL, I'll just throw that one in there.
Thanks.
Moving on. Now we definitely have talked about females being underrepresented, but I have found one study that looked at caffeine and anaerobic measures in women, specifically female college athletes, volleyball players and weightlifters, and they participated in a randomized control trial looking at anaerobic measures such as jump performance and maximal strength. Now, caffeine had a really small, not a really, but had a small but statistically significant improvement compared to the placebo across all the jumping tests that they conducted in the study, including the squat jump height, both weighted and unweighted, counter movement jump. Max strength, however, there was no significant differences between the caffeine and placebo groups for isometric mid-thigh pull and any measures of rate of force development. So specifically in this female group of college athletes, 6 milligrams per kilo dose of caffeine enhanced jumping performance, but did not significantly improve max isometric strength, specifically related to the isometric mid-thigh pull. So something's there from an anaerobic point of view. Yeah, something that needs a lot more work.
Yeah, more
in the
research
female
needs to be
space.
done. That study
Yep.
was done in it was published in 2021. So
Yep.
that was done quite a few years ago. I think we'll see the explosion of this for female research really soon. So, and it'll be great when they do. So that's interesting research, Mick.
Yep. All right. Moving on to resistance training. So caffeine has been looked at by a group of authors in a systematic review again, and looking at its effect on resistance training, specifically maximal muscular strength, both isometric and isokinetic, muscular endurance and muscular power and velocity. And what's your gut feel here, mate? What do you think the authors found?
I think that they found some positive results. I mean, even just thinking for myself, I'm very similar to you that I'll tend to exercise in the morning and I do weights 3 or 4 times a week. I do notice the difference if I do have my double shot or not on how heavy I can push. So I'm sure this has been borne out in the systematic review.
Yeah, you are right, mate. We wouldn't be talking about otherwise. So the caffeine ingestion significantly increased maximal voluntary contractions by approximately 4% when looking at isometric and isokinetic strength, which is a good win. Isokinetic strength improved by 6%. Not that a whole lot of people have got regular use of an isokinetic machine, but if you've got one, go for it.
Yeah.
Muscular endurance was improved by 6 to 7%. And power and velocity also improved with caffeine ingestion. Here's something that you talked about before is this the perceived exertion. And this is what the authors did talk about as to why some of these potential positive effects and reasons behind them. So they do comment in this paper that a reduction in perceived exertion might play a role in performance enhancement, allowing individuals to perform more work with less subjective strain, although the findings are a bit inconsistent between studies. And effects on pain perception seem less likely to explain the performance benefit. So we're seeing probably some true ergogenic benefit here from these studies. And interestingly, and this kind of gets into my next point, is that they did find, and they're suggesting that caffeine may reduce the perception of DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, but it doesn't seem to have a change on the physiological markers that is associated with DOMS. So those blood markers associated with DOMS.
Which is really interesting finding, isn't it? To think that, like you do notice less discomfort after you've done weights, let's say yesterday, and you should be a bit sore the following day if you've done them heavy. And if you do take caffeine, and I assume that means taking caffeine before the bout of exercise, or is it taking caffeine the following day when you kind of have those, do you know?
Yeah. So the work that's been done in a separate review, so 14 human trials looking at the effect of caffeine supplementation on DOMs. They talk about caffeine being taken 24 to 72 hours after the workout, after the muscle damaging exercise. It significantly attenuated pain response, so significantly dropped pain perception, somewhere between 4 to 26%. So that's the beauty of these systematic reviews, right? You got often more than huge ranges that can sometimes come at you. So some studies found as little as 4% reduction in perception of pain, and then some as much as 26%. But I guess the big one here is that even though caffeine reduces your perception in DOMs, it doesn't change the biological breakdown of tissue.
Yeah, and inflammatory markers, I
blood
expect.
markers.
So, yeah.
They still happen, but how you can deal and tolerate with that soreness the 24 hours afterwards, 48 hours afterwards is seemingly better if you have some coffee on board over the next 2 to 3 days after.
What a great reason just to continue to drink coffee after working out.
There's just no downside. That's not true. It's got a whole lot of benefit. There are certainly some recommendations which we'll talk about now, and obviously everything in moderation, right? So I talk to people all the time about coffee seems to sort of come up in life's conversations. There's quite a lot of people who just it hasn't worked for them. They've tried to drink it in the past and it just hasn't worked for them, made them too jittery, too anxious. And obviously that's that individual variability that exists across lots of domains. Then you got conversely, like Jeff Kennett, who can easily punch out 15 a day and probably not be that badly affected by it. Meanwhile, probably the rest of us should probably sit between 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day if we're going to go down that path.
I think that's the general consensus, but I think there is, and I don't know a lot about this, so if people are interested, maybe they research it themselves, but there are genetic kind of traits on people who respond to caffeine more than others. So it's not all just in your head.
Yes, exactly right. So practical considerations, dosages, timings, and safety is how we're going to round out this one. So as part of one of the systematic reviews by Grigic and colleagues, and combining that information with the International Society of Sports Nutrition position stance, they've basically come up with about half a dozen recommendations here on how we can and should use caffeine sensibly and safely to get some benefits in performance in whatever we're doing to help ourselves. So the dosage ranges between 3 milligrams to 9 milligrams per kilogram of body mass. We talked about that before. If we're looking at 3 milligrams for a 60 kilogram female, we're looking at 180 milligrams of caffeine, which effectively works out to be a cup of coffee, up to 9. And so if we're looking at once again, a 60 kilogram female, 9 times 60, we're looking at 540 milligrams of caffeine. Once again, we're probably looking at that 2 to 3 cups of coffee. Now, the timing is always the interesting one. The recommendation is that it's ingested approximately 60 minutes before exercise. To see the best effect of caffeine.
I reckon there's another kind of point to that as well. Is I've also had like black coffee, let's say 15 or 20 minutes before I do some aerobic exercise, and I've just got all that kind of black syrup sloshing around in my tummy.
Yep.
And sometimes it wants to come back up. That's just me anyway. It
doesn't feel nice.
It doesn't feel nice. So I think that, whether tablets are obviously a little bit different, but I think that clearly like the ergogenic benefit is there, but also just the gastric discomfort is also something for people to consider.
Yeah, and then I think about the practical nature of that too. So the early morning rises, like for me, if I'm going to get up and go to the gym at 5 o'clock, that means I've got to get up at 4 o'clock and have that coffee. So sometimes it's hard to probably do it perfectly. I think at a stretch, the best I could do is probably have it half an hour before I go. So that's certainly going to be a challenge for some people to do it.
Yeah.
But it certainly seems like it can be used. It might be just, hitting at straps when you're 20 minutes into your bike ride or your run. That gives you that extra bit of a kick when you're trying to chase down the person in front of you. So look, it's there to be used. but 60 minutes is certainly the recommended time. The side effects and the known side effects, such as insomnia, jitteriness, anxiousness, heart palpitation, seem to occur on the higher end of that dosage, as opposed to your 3s and your 6 milligram per kilogram dosage. So that's been found. The source of the caffeine, most studies use caffeine capsules or powder, and coffee as it comes in a cup certainly appears equally effective if the caffeine dose is matched to what occurs in a lot of these scientific studies where it's absolutely perfectly measured out to the microgram. But there's also, you can get it in gums and all sorts of different forms. And the last one is obviously just with that consideration too is, a lot of the stuff, as we mentioned before, in terms of this information, it's largely been done on males. We do need to take care in applying a lot of this stuff to the female audience as well. That's about it, mate, so far. I did want to just shine a light on some of the caffeine content that would be really widely available, because there's some sneaky products out there that sort of dose up the caffeine effect.
And you don't know. Yeah.
And you absolutely don't know. So I've got a list here of some of the really high potent caffeine drinks that are out there. Starbucks breakfast blend brewed coffee, a 600 ml size, has got a whopping 415 milligrams
Incredible.
of caffeine in one hit. So that's, for someone that wants to go out for a bike ride or run, we're already on the kind of higher end of that 6 to 9 milligrams, depending on your body weight. All your pre-workouts, Jack 3D, Nitroflex, Morph 3, blah, 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 they're all ranging between 300 and 400, depending on which one you take. A good old standard cup of coffee can range, depending on the barista that you see that day, from 130 to 282 milligrams. I won't go into all of them. Red Bull can range your smaller cans at 80, your big 500 ml cans at 160. Mother, big can, 160. Monster, big can, 160. Rockstar, 160. So all your energy drinks out there. Black tea, 25 to 110. So tea's a little bit lower on the caffeine spectrum, all the way down to hot chocolate. Little hot chocolate, 5 to 10 milligrams of coffee.
Then that's
caffeine.
Are you trying to talk me out of having that before I go to bed, Mick?
You don't want to just be up all night staring at the ceiling. So just be careful with those late night hot chocolates with your little marshmallows before bed in your slippers.
That may not be a good image for people who are listening. Sounds like Hugh Hefner to me, but anyway.
Mate, that's it.
Yeah. That's
it for me anyway. Have you got anything else to add?
No. Well, I think that we all talk about exercise being the magic pill when it comes to health, and but I think that when it comes to something that's legal, caffeine, as far as a magic pill, comes kind of like a distant second. But you can't see many faults in it unless you have a bad reaction to it and you don't like it. But for sport, exercise, even health, if you take it in the right quantities, caffeine is terrific.
Yep. All right, mate. We've gone 7 minutes over from what we like to do, so I better wrap this up before we get sacked.
Bring us home.
All right, mate. So that's a wrap for this episode of Exercise Matters. If you enjoyed the chat, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your mates. A quick disclaimer, this podcast is for educational purposes and is not medical or individual advice. Always seek guidance from a qualified health professional for your specific needs. A big thanks to our sponsors, Premax, high-performance skincare for high-performance people, and Learn.physio, world-class education for health professionals. We'll catch you guys next week.
See you next week.